Okay. This is an unannounced stream. We'll see how this goes. It'll be the last open chat, so go ahead and get your trolling done while you can. That being said, I'm not a medical professional. Nothing I say is intended as health advice. Any major changes you make to your diet or any other aspect of your lifestyle is something you check with a doctor before enacting in your own life. Furthermore, I'm not a financial advisor. Nothing I say is a recommendation for investment. Thirdly, I'm a law-abiding citizen. Nothing I say is an admission of guilt. And lastly, but not leastly, all opinions are my own and are in no way affiliated with Google or any other network you may be viewing or listening to this on. That being said, welcome to my stream. There's going to be some changes coming to the future streams. I was going to do a quick discussion about that. We're going to be moving to an audio format going forward. That means that you will need to follow my new Twitter account, OM Bruce Venture, on X, if you would like an opportunity to join the discussion. I will still be streaming the discussion to YouTube. However, I will be turning off the chat going forward. There will be no chat. Okay. You know, as much as I've been enjoying the chat and, you know, we've been doing it this way for a long time, I feel that between the constant trolling from random people, from the Reels page or whatever you call it on here, is distracting. It makes it hard for me to get through all the questions in a timely fashion. And there's also the ever-growing concern of chatbots as well. So in the interest of stopping bots and stopping immature people from commenting, we will move to an audio-based discussion. Now, I know not everyone has perfect English, and that's fine, okay? If you have a question, it can be a short question. It doesn't have to be a long question. And you're welcome to use Translate or whatever to help you, you know, pronunciate and whatnot. Luckily, YouTube has a auto-translation feature, so my responses will be available here in that way, right? And so going forward, that's how it's going to operate. So you got to follow Bruce Venture on X if you want to be part of the discussion. But if you just want to listen, it'll be here as well, okay? Now, I may not always have a Wi-Fi connection or a strong enough cellular connection in the future to be doing video streams. So there may also come times when, you know, we will only be streaming on X, okay? Another interesting thing about that is that on those occasions, we will be able to have a more, let's say, unfiltered discussion, because regarding my own spiritual development, I have had some recent progress and discoveries within the realm of Tantra, okay? And while that's a largely misunderstood concept, which is not all about sex, there is a sexual aspect to it, and perhaps in the future, not right away, because I'm still learning myself, there may be just some discussions about that, which will also only take place on X, since, you know, as many people understand, there is a greater degree of, thank you for the pumpkin, but there's a greater degree of openness in the discussions that we're, things that we're allowed to discuss on X, and being that my background comes from an area of sexual expertise rather than spiritual expertise, though I have been gifted by the divine with some insights that are above average, I would say, within the realm of spirituality as well. My actual mastery and underlying skill set and experiences are very much so leaning into the area of sex. Okay, so we are going to make it a slow transition into, into X. It's not going to be a direct thing. And then hopefully in the cases when we do have discussions, which are maybe not YouTube rated, though they will still be of an educational nature, I will just post possibly edited audio or whatever to YouTube so that we don't neglect this particular platform or the people following me here as well. So that being said, thank you all for coming. I'm going to do some quick greetings. I can take some questions. This will be the last text-based chat on Google. Not to say that I'll never ever do one again, but I have no intention currently of doing one again. So we will see. What is my truth today may not be my truth tomorrow. We never know. But I'm always in the moment, and I'm always speaking from my truth in any specific moment, and this is my truth at that moment. So don't forget, follow OM Bruce Venture on X, and you may want to also check out my other accounts on X, especially if you're into my other types of content not related to spirituality, though I'm hoping to get a spiritual reaction out of my partner this evening in another broadcast that I will be doing with someone very close to me at around 6 p.m. Pacific time. So that being said, I'm going back to the top of the chat. We're going to work our way down. Drop your questions now. This is not going to be a long chat. Thank you for whoever was doing pumpkins and things or whatever people are doing. Donations are always welcome. And soon in the future, there will be also, should I say, well, never mind. I'm not even going to go there. But if you want to become a member as well, it's always appreciated. And yeah. Good morning, Noi. Good to see you. Thank you for being my mod and my friend. I appreciate you being here. Vedant Sharma. I am originally from California, though now I do not consider myself a resident of any place in the world, but rather a world citizen. And so thank you for coming all the way from India to my my YouTube stream. John Thomas. Cal Drogon's cool. I'll take it. I'll take it. Kinfolk wanted to be the first one to comment on my unibrow. So you are the first. We'll let it slide since it's not taken on a repetitive nature, as it no doubt will by the end of this stream. Let's see. Tarzan's also cool. I'll take the Tarzan comment since it's the first one. We don't, you know what I mean? It's got to love being a little bit original for at least a moment, even though it's really not. Let's see. What percentage Neanderthal am I? I don't really know, to be honest. But I'm definitely proud of my Neanderthal heritage, so no issue there. Already answered that one from Shakib. What's up, Wad? What is suffering? Suffering is desire, right? It's suffering is to want, right? Wanting is suffering. And I would think that that pretty much completely and totally encompasses the word suffering, because even people who are suffering physically continue to suffer only because they want to stop being in pain, right? There are actually even people in the world that enjoy pain, right? So it really is a mind over matter kind of a thing, and all desire leads to suffering. The less you want, the less you suffer. The less you desire, the less you suffer. But now, we shouldn't necessarily, it doesn't mean that we should resist desire. It doesn't necessarily mean that we should resist pain. It doesn't necessarily mean that we should resist wanting, but rather embracing the full spectrum of our emotions, right? Because while all desire may lead to suffering, all suffering leads to greatness. Because in order to realize that it is possible to exist without suffering, one must first suffer in totality to know the difference. Because in a non-dualistic mindset, which is completely and totally necessary for spiritual advancement, one must understand these basic precepts. You know what I'm saying? So, and the contrast of all things, rather than thinking of things as suffering or non-suffering or good or evil or life or death and so on and so forth, we can simply collapse all that thought in order to realize that there indeed does exist the possibility of non-suffering, and that the only path to non-suffering is spirituality. So, thank you, Noy, so much for the donation. That is very kind of you. I appreciate you always. Thank you for showing your appreciation. So on and so forth. I love you. Does anyone here have any comments of substance? Thank you very much, by the way, E. Peterson, for the amazing question. That was very good. And I'm glad that we have already gotten some type of usable content here for people who may be watching this after the stream is over. So I appreciate you for the meaningful question. And thank you, Razar, for echoing my comment. I'm going to go ahead and continue. Let's see what we got. Can I continue on what I was going to say about spirituality and ending suffering? I mean, in what way? I mean, we would need a more specific line of thought or question or some type of route, because to just continue on about spirituality and ending suffering is something that is a little bit too broad spectrum for me to attack into a single stream. If you would like a further explanation on ways to go about potentially ending your suffering through spirituality, I invite you to check out my live archive. It has probably at least 100 hours, if not 150 hours at this point, of me talking about specifically this subject. But if you would like to narrow your question into something that I can answer right now, it would be greatly appreciated, and I would love to answer that for you. Dominator says, it seems most suffering is caused by the ambitions of psychopaths supported by the ignorant. Well, not necessarily. While those people do have a dramatic influence on society and the earth as a whole, they doesn't necessarily mean that we need to allow them to affect us personally within our lives. You know what I'm saying? It's those things are dramatically influenced by the conditions of society, the indoctrination that we start receiving at a young age, and money, so on and so forth, the constant thought that we need to impress other people or maintain some type of social standing rather than living by our own truth and the greater truth, which is the truth of God, for lack of a better word, which most people would understand. But you know, the truth is that both the ignorant and the weak-minded do strongly support psychopathic ambition. But the truth is that those psychopaths and those ignorant people are suffering more than anyone else, really. Even more than the people that they are tormenting or creating uncomfortable situations for, and that's why they're like that. And so it's best to approach everything from a position of compassion and realize that people with certain psychological traits may or may not be able to change those traits and are operating through their own sense of self, which doesn't actually exist, right? So it's, again, suffering leads to more suffering. It's kind of the thing. And basically all those people are operating from a place of desire, right? And they're operating from that place of desire through the scope of their own perception, which is impossible to understand for any human being, truly, without spiritual insight, right? So unless you can tap into the all-seeing eye and understand what life is like through the eyes of every person on the planet, which is only possible through spirituality, it is impossible to truly understand the scope of perception or the things that led someone to become, say, a psychopath or an ignorant person. So, again, it all has to do with desire. And desire has a lot to do with the scope of perception. So, Cadence says, sorry, I'm just got here. That was the last I heard before you asked the chat for a question. All good, Cadence. I love you. Appreciate you for being part of the stream. Feel free to lay forth any other thing that, whatever. Is suffering necessary? I don't know. I would imagine it's unavoidable. I don't think that, you know, I guess if you were able, it's not, maybe not necessary in the sense of, like, you know, if indeed there ever was someone who existed, like a very popular person named Jesus, you know, who perhaps was born without suffering, but, you know, ended up suffering in the end, you might have said that it wasn't necessary, but perhaps it was. You never really know. It's hard to say. I would say that while it may or may not be necessary, to that answer, I don't really know. I will say that it seems to be nearly completely unavoidable at some point. But, you know what I'm saying? The transmutation of suffering is extremely powerful. And so while it may or may not be necessary, it doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing, right? Everything in the world can be a sage, right? If you're a student, right? If you're not willing to learn from something, then is suffering necessary? No, it's not necessary if you're not willing to learn from it. If you're willing to learn from suffering, then yes, it's not only necessary, but it's a beautiful thing, right? Which could potentially be the most valuable thing that you will ever experience, right? Other than the cessation of suffering. Hoku says, I'm sorry people are so rude. I'm embarrassed to be a human sometimes. Aloha. Aloha to you as well. That is also, you know what, you kind of are mirroring my own thoughts. In my last stream, I was a little bit down, and thinking that maybe I would stop streaming, not because I was personally hurt by the comments and the rudeness in the chat, but rather I was hurt on behalf of mankind, because I realized that for somebody to come into to be scrolling through YouTube, random people's feeds, just to make rude comments, right? That person must be in so much pain themselves, right? They must have been abused in some way. You know what I mean? Like it's really hard to say what exactly goes into creating a human that operates in their life like that, right? And the fact that there's so many of them means that either Google was purposely pushing my algorithm to turmoiled people who have been abused sometime in their life, or that such a dramatically huge part of the population has indeed been so mentally abused, so dragged through life, that the only thing they can think of doing is to go on an evil device, right? Log on one of these networks and look for someone to take their own personal frustration and suffering out on, right? Without knowing anything about them, just other than what pops up and that they see in front of their face. So, you know, you have to really, really, I mean, it is embarrassing to be a human, but humility is a fucking incredible virtue, right? And so, you know, back again to the scope of perception, where you never really know what leads into the creation of people like that. And so we have to approach everything and everybody with compassion, even if they themselves don't have any compassion, even if they themselves are an ignorant or embarrassing person. We still have to approach them with compassion, because truly, like some of them, maybe not, some of them maybe are just very kind of weak-minded, and their mother wasn't nice to them and that caused it. But other people might have been truly abused, like truly tormented, that led them to become like this, right? So it's really hard to say to what degree of pain made someone like that. And so we have to be compassionate to everybody, no matter how abhorrent their behavior is. Cadence says, I understand that in Buddhism, ending suffering is to break samsara, meaning that to live on earth is only suffering. Is there a way to not suffer here on earth? Well, that way is through spirituality. It's not necessarily just through Buddhism. This is a strong concept within Buddhism. It's one of my favorite concepts within Buddhism, but I'm not a Buddhist. I don't know exactly what samsara is. I think that means reincarnation. And truly, yes, to live on earth is to suffer, because we have so many lives. Like, reincarnation is confirmed. I've remembered several of my own past lives, actually many of them, and so has many other people. So we know that reincarnation exists. And to think that we could live in multiple lives, even maybe like a couple, which we live many more than that, right? We would say that in one of those lives, or multiple of those lives, or most likely all of those lives, we encountered some suffering. So most likely, yes, you would say that it is impossible to become a soul on earth without suffering. Because if, you know, perhaps on a single life scale, somebody that's already done a lot of work in past lives or something might be able to reincarnate here and bear the fruits of their work in other lives, and perhaps that they would not be suffering. I don't know. I don't know anyone like that, but presumably maybe it's happened at some point. Have I remembered any lives that didn't contain suffering? No. All the lives I've ever remembered, including this one, plenty of suffering, right? But I can also tell you, without even thinking of any of the other lives, just the one that I'm in right now, that I have done all four. You know what I'm saying? The Four Noble Truths are my own noble truths, regardless of the fact that I'm not a Buddhist. All right? So that's something I think that everybody can take away from Buddhism, other than people who are tremendously influenced by a counteractive dogma like Christianity or something. But they also can cessate from suffering. It's just that they have a different way of going about it, and they don't acknowledge the fact that there is reincarnation, even though they believe in a Messiah, which is supposed to reincarnate. So, you know, there's truth in every religion. There's good teachings in every religion. However, religion itself is not spirituality. You know what I'm saying? There are spiritual people who are religious, but religion and spirituality are not the same, right? So, you guys don't forget to subscribe. Very important. Subscribe and follow my Twitter, Bruce Venture. It's a new account, and the discussion is going to be moving to an audio-based discussion. I will still stream that discussion here on YouTube when possible, but in the interest of having a lesser internet requirement to continue these discussions, and in interest of, you know, foregoing the possibility of chatbots and so on and so forth, I'm going to take the discussion to an audio base on Spaces on my Bruce Venture X account. Okay, so you can still subscribe here in case you prefer this and you want to just listen here or watch here, or you just really like the video, but the discussion itself is not going to be text-based anymore. It's going to be audio-based on Spaces. So make sure that you're following the Bruce Venture account. Very important if you want to keep going with this discussion. All right? Jim is crying. Well, Jim, don't cry. It can get better. Kent says, damn, you're right. The psychopathic and ignorant are suffering the most because they're blind. Yes, exactly. It's true. We have to have compassion. Brother Nate needs suffering. Says, suffering isn't the problem. I think needless suffering initiated by harm. Well, the thing is that we have to realize that there is no difference between us and them. There is no me and you. You know what I'm saying? There is no suffering or non-suffering, really, when you take into the account that we are all stemming from a singular consciousness, right? And that from that singular consciousness, we've broken ourselves into souls, which are reincarnating in what feels like a linear fashion, right? But all things actually have happened simultaneously within the universe, right? It's like a quantum universe, right? So God has a thought, right? But being unlimited, being infinite, God's thought is so huge that it's an entire universe, right? Where of billions of souls, potentially trillions of souls, maybe even more. Who knows how many souls? Unlimited souls, infinite souls, right? And that in a single flash, in a single moment, in a single timeless instant, right? All things happen, right? But we, as our souls, our job is to experience those things so that we can create wisdom for that which is infinite, because the infinite is cursed with infinity, right? And in order to process infinity, we have to break it down into little fractalated selves to experience everything from the inside. So if we like this universe, Earth, or whatever, however you want to break it down into your own concept where you can try to understand it, because the infinite is not understandable, right? In the same way that you have a bad thought, you're like, oh shit, I just thought of something terrible. It didn't really happen. Or you had a bad dream. It didn't really happen, right? But this entire universe is like a dream or a bad thought or something like that of God, for lack of a better way to understand it, right? And we are experiencing it from the inside so that something can be derived from it. Very much in like a quantum computer spits out a huge data set almost instantly, and then we would use like a supercomputer to break it down into just zeros and ones, you know what I'm saying, in different data sets so that we can understand it in some kind of way, right? So this is the same as what we're experiencing here in this universe, right? Everything happens at once. We're just experiencing it in a linear way, right? Think of yourself as a data set, right? Or like an application within a computer. You know what I'm saying? Like a thing within a thing within a thing, right? And that we're experiencing it in a linear fashion like a supercomputer, right? Zeros and ones. But it all happened quantumly, where everything could be a 0 or a 1, or neither, or both, right? So, so just consider this entire universe as like just one bad thought. It's full of suffering because we thought of suffering. We thought, hey, what if it was like this? What if there was time? What if everybody fucking had to eat? You know what I'm saying? What if everything was consuming each other and that was the only way to make order out of chaos, right? Like that, if you had a thought about that, like what if there was this? Well, oh shit, what if we fucking had a certain amount of time that we could only live for, right? What if there was time? You know what I'm saying? Like what if? What if? That's the fucking question. What if? So we're answering the question of what if, right? And it might seem like it's, like we have to go through a lot of suffering for, thousands of times over again, like a never-ending death sentence, right? Like a never-ending death sentence for God. But imagine how small your suffering is compared to God's suffering, because God is experiencing what we're all experiencing, not just us, but every animal, every bacteria, every things that are way so much bigger than what we can comprehend from where we're at, because there is no big and small. It's all just relative. It's all just a perception. So while we think that we're suffering, suffering doesn't actually exist, right? Which is why when you stop suffering, when you stop desiring, when you stop, thinking of this or that, when you stop having duality, suddenly everything changes within inside you and you become godlike, because now you're embracing something that is closer to that which is incomprehensible, right? So let me see. I'm going back to the chat. Sorry. CB says, what is this all about? Is it about the brain? I mean, you could look at it like that, but the brain doesn't actually exist because you don't exist, because I don't exist, because none of us exist, because this world doesn't exist. This is all just something that came and went in an instant. We're experiencing it right now so that our higher self can derive something from it and do whatever it's doing, which is also beyond our comprehension. Okay? And Kenneth says, spirituality is designed to alleviate suffering. Yes. That's the only way to alleviate suffering, is to destroy the ego. But you don't even really destroy the ego. The ego actually can't be destroyed, right? It can be ignored. It can be quieted. It can be... But there's no reason... Even if you could destroy the ego, why would you want to, right? Because that's duality too. That's to say ego and non-ego. But the entire universe is ego. It's God's ego, right? God had a bad thought. God's ego had a bad... Like, that which is above, which is beyond God. That which is nameless, which can't be described. The infinite, the source, the thing which is beyond comprehension, right? Its ego is God, right? And that ego does the same thing that all of our egos do. It had a bad thought, right? And that bad thought is the universe. Okay? But there is no good and bad. So it's not really a bad thought. It's just we think it's bad because we're the ones down here suffering, right? Prophets and Principles said, bro suffered the most. I did my fair share, okay? I did my fair share. Patron says, this Bible stuff is always confusing me. Well, that's why that we don't need a Bible, right? When you try to describe the indescribable, right? When you try to put that which cannot be described into words, you end up with something like the Bible. But it can never be true. You know what I'm saying? All religion is based upon ego. It's just based upon a higher aspect of the ego, because everything is ego. You see what I'm saying? So when you try to put something incomprehensible into words, something that is beyond word, beyond the capabilities of words into words, you end up with a huge book. You know what I'm saying? And you can do that over and over again, which is exactly what they've done with every single religion, is that they keep trying to put things into words which can't be described, which can only be experienced, and through experience you can comprehend it in a way that will still be without words, but at least you personally will have a different understanding of it, which will alleviate your suffering, because you'll understand that it's not real. You'll understand that there is no good and evil, there is no light and dark, there is no negative and positive, there is no male and female, there is no nothing. There's no suffering, non-suffering. There's no life, there's no death. That it's all, everything goes up to something which is beyond all that. And only through experiencing that can you comprehend it in some kind of way. But that way is always going to be without words, right? So what I'm doing right now is somewhat hypocritical, but it's entertaining nonetheless, right? And your interest into it is what leads you to experiencing it. You wanting to experience it leads you to experiencing it, right? You wanting to live with virtue leads you to having virtue, right? You having virtue leads you to understand the universal nature of virtue, which is everything, right? That it all goes up to something which is incomprehensible, and that is what most people call God, but which God, the word God, cannot actually encompass, because that which is the highest of the high is an entire pantheon of gods. But that entire pantheon of gods is just simply a mood or a personality or so on and so forth of that greatest ego of all egos. But it's all ego. You see what I'm saying? Dominator says, we need to suffer and toil and build to learn new things. This is necessary suffering. Exactly. But it's necessary suffering of God, because your suffering is small. Eventually your suffering will end, be it through spirituality or through death, right? But God, for lack of a better word, is experiencing all of our suffering simultaneously, right? As well as all of the other good things like love and so on and so forth, right? So our suffering doesn't really matter, right? Because we're not the one experiencing it all at once, right? God's suffering is the greatest suffering of all. So that's the suffering that really matters. This is why we have to uplift each other, right? And help alleviate each other from suffering, have compassion for each other, right? Because we are not separate. We are all one. So while I can alleviate my own suffering and be like, okay, that's cool, and I can go live in a cave or whatever, which also I'm sure a lot of people think really funny because of my appearance, but truly, I could go live in a cave and be non-suffering and everything's good, right? But when I realize that there is no me and you, that I am you and you are me and we are everybody fucking else, right? Then the only way to alleviate our true suffering, which is God's suffering, is to alleviate the suffering of all people on earth, right? So only through alleviating all suffering on earth can we alleviate God's suffering, which should be our top priority, right? We don't matter. God matters. And so God's suffering is the true suffering, the deepest suffering, which needs to be alleviated. And the only way to alleviate that is to do our best to alleviate the suffering of all people on the planet. Do you know what I'm saying? Tony says in capitals, it must exist. It is what is real, so it must exist. Physics is what is real, must exist. No, but it doesn't. Do you see what I'm saying? And if you're really super into science, which it sounds like you are, and you want to believe that all this is real and that it exists and that it's not just a quantum thing that just happened, then you should really delve into, rather than physics and all this other stuff, you should delve into quantum science. And indeed, quantum science is what they use for advanced things, like really advanced concepts in physics and so on and so forth, right? So You know what I'm saying? You can break it down in any way. Science is just another religion, right? Because it's also a lie, just like religion, because it's a partial truth, which can't fully be comprehended. Do you see what I'm saying? So in the same way that in religion, they're trying to explain that which can't be explained, which is beyond words, and that just creates multiple religions, which are based upon belief. And belief is a dirty, nasty fucking word because it means you don't know and you don't have faith. Then, right? Then you can look at science the same way, because no matter how much you learn about science and how much you break things down into scientific fact and so on and so forth, right? You never have the full truth. And so it becomes a manipulation because you think that you know something which you don't actually know, because you don't know everything about it, and you never will, right? You'll never know. It'll never be able to be put completely into words. You can create experiments and things which are recreatable, right? But what's the fucking point? Right? If you're never going to encompass it as a whole, and that it will never lead you to suffering or alleviate suffering from the world, which is God's suffering, right? So let it all go. Forget about science and religion. There's no difference, right? Just have virtue. You know what I'm saying? The 7 deadly sins, the 7 godly virtues, that's the religion. Don't do the sins. Embrace the virtues. That's it. You know what I'm saying? You are an ego. You want to get rid of your own ego, because your ego is an inferior ego which you created, right? But you yourself are an ego which God created, right? So you yourself are more advanced than your own ego. And so you need to become something good, something virtuous, because in the same way that we have the angel on our shoulder and the devil on our shoulder, right? When the devil's talking, if you're a virtuous person, you ignore it. Right? When it's giving you these intrusive thoughts or whatever, you ignore the devil on your shoulder. But when the angel's talking and it's telling you good things, you're like, yeah, I love this. It makes me happy. This makes me feel good. Right? Like, I enjoy this. And that's the same thing that you are. Right? And there's no such thing as prayer or non-prayer. Every thought in your head, every word from your mouth, every action that you do, everything that you are and ever will be, or will ever accomplish or non-accomplish, is all a prayer, in a sense, right? And so it's important for you to have good thoughts, right? Because then you get acknowledged by that which you call God. Because you're a good thought, you become the angel on God's shoulder, and suddenly you become acknowledged, and your life gets better. It's the virtue of all things. It's God's virtue, is to reward that. But if you're having negative thoughts or negative actions, even worse, right? Then you get ignored at best. And in the worst case, you get taught, right? You don't want a fucking lesson. You don't want to fucking learn nothing, all right? Because learning is suffering. That's how you learn. And it's not out of punishment. It's out of love. It all is based upon love, because God, that what you call God, loves everything and everyone so much it's almost incomprehensible. But you can experience that love, and then you will understand. Only through experiencing the love of God can you understand how much everything and everybody is loved. Even the things which you think are the most abhorrent, the psychotic, the ignorant, the pain, the suffering, the fucking horrible, most things that are beyond your comprehension, which happen on this planet fucking 1,000 times a day, every day, through all of fucking history, beyond any kind, like whatever you think is the most worst thing that could ever fucking happen, the worst suffering of all that, there's something so much worse. And that's going on right now all over the fucking planet, right? Sorry, I got off on another thing. I had too many thoughts going through my head at the same time. But God loves it all. Okay? God loves even the most horrific fuckers on the fucking planet. Excuse my language. All right? So when you realize that, you can realize that even punishment, what feels like punishment, is not punishment. It's love, right? Because it's just like when you're, say you go to the gym and you're working out and you're just like, I'm fake, now I make myself suffer, right? Ugh. You're hurting yourself, right? But why are you hurting yourself? To make yourself stronger, right? Your bicep doesn't like to fucking do curls. It wants to chill. It doesn't want to burn. But if you're weak, then you need to be strengthened, right? And only weak people hurt other people. Only weak people do unconscious things, right? Be it weak of self or weak of mind or weak of soul or weak of spirit. Any kind of weakness has to be eliminated from yourself, right? If you want to be strong. And so since you're part of God and everybody's part of God, right? Then those who are weak must be strengthened. And so you being strengthened is an act of love, but love for the self, right? That's how God loves themselves, is by fucking strengthening themselves, right? So, have virtue. I love you all. It's the end of my stream. Until next time. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter, Bruce Venture.